All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. We're diving into, one of the most famous unsolved mysteries this time, the JonBenét Ramsey case.
Yeah, a truly fascinating one.
It is, definitely. I mean, even if you don't know every single detail, you at least know the basics, right? Christmas, 1996.
Boulder, Colorado.
6-year-old JonBenét, a beauty queen, found dead in the family's basement. It just, yeah, turned the holidays into just a total nightmare. So for this deep dive, we're using two news articles from Fox News and excerpts from the JonBenét Ramsey Wikipedia entry. We're going to use these sources to see, 28 years later, are we any closer to cracking this case?
Yeah, I think it's a case that it stuck with so many people. It's that mix of like wealth and beauty pageants and this image of a perfect family, and then bam, everything just explodes.
It's true. And then right away, the evidence, it didn't add up. No forced entry, so maybe someone on the inside. But then there's this crazy ransom note, super detailed.
And not just detailed, but the amount they asked for, $118,000.
Right. You don't just make up a number like that. And John Ramsey himself, actually, in an interview that resurfaced, said that amount was almost exactly what his bonus was earlier that year. Like, what are the chances?
It's definitely one of those details that keeps people guessing. I mean, some say it points straight to John Ramsey.
No.
Why else would they ask for that specific amount? Unless they knew about the bonus.
It does make you wonder.
But we can't jump to conclusions. Maybe the kidnapper, knew something about their finances, or maybe they wanted to throw off the investigators.
Okay, so the ransom note is already weird. But then there's what they found at the scene, like how they found JonBenét. The garrote, the head trauma. It seems so personal, so angry.
The autopsy, yeah, they said it was strangulation and a skull fracture. Really brutal.
Yeah.
Especially for someone so young. It does make you think maybe this was personal, some kind of grudge or a fight that got out of hand.
So we've got a shady ransom note, a scene that screams personal attack, and a child is dead. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And the investigation, it seems like it was messed up too. Like, didn't they make some big mistakes early on? Messed up evidence, a messed up crime scene? Like, how does that happen in such a big case?
Yeah, and unfortunately, those mistakes really messed things up. It made it way harder to tell what evidence was real, what was an accident, and figuring out when things happened, that became a nightmare. Plus, people started saying the whole investigation was biased from the start, like they jumped on the Ramseys too fast and missed other things.
Right. So, like you said, the Ramseys, they were suspects almost immediately. Why? What made the investigators focus on them so much?
Well, a few things. No forced entry, so someone who had access, right? And that ransom note, and the possible link to John Ramsey's bonus. And then there's the fact that the Ramseys didn't call 911 right away after they found the note. They called friends and their lawyer first, which, some people saw that as trying to hide something.
Oh, I see. And then there's the theory about JonBenét's brother, Burke, who was 9 at the time. What evidence was there that he might have been involved?
There was a CBS documentary a few years ago that said Burke might have accidentally killed JonBenét, and then the parents made it look like a kidnapping to protect him.
Mm.
It used behavioral analysis from his interviews and suggested maybe he'd been aggressive towards JonBenét before, like that time he hit her with a golf club.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
But Burke has always said he didn't do it, and he even sued CBS after that documentary for defamation. We don't know all the details of the settlement, though. So the documentary put Burke back in the spotlight, but there's still nothing solid connecting him to the crime.
Right. But focusing just on the family seems kind of narrow, especially when you consider the intruder angle. Didn't investigators look into that possibility too? What evidence supported that theory?
Yeah, there were a few things. The biggest one was this broken basement window, which looked like someone forced it open, and then a boot print they found in the basement that didn't match any shoes the family had. Plus, people were saying there were a bunch of burglaries happening in the area around the same time, so maybe there was an intruder active in the neighborhood.
So you've got two big theories. Someone inside, maybe the family, or an intruder who broke in. It's like the investigation was being pulled in two totally different directions. How did they even handle that? Did one theory end up stronger than the other?
The investigation was definitely all over the place, and it got even worse because the investigators themselves didn't agree. Like Detective Lou Smith, they brought him in to help with the case, and he was all about the intruder theory.
He had a lot of experience. Oh,
Yeah, tons. He thought the broken window, the boot print, and the other burglaries, that was all strong evidence.
okay, so an experienced detective is backing the intruder theory. Did that change things? Or did the people who thought the family did it push back?
There was definitely pushback. So much so that Smith actually quit the case. He felt like they weren't listening to him, that focusing on the family was messing everything up. And then on the other side, you had Steve Thomas, one of the lead detectives. He really suspected the Ramseys. He quit too, because he thought the district attorney was too close to the Ramseys and was interfering.
Wow, so even the investigators were divided. Some thought the Ramseys were guilty, others were sure it was an outsider. It sounds like everyone's beliefs were getting mixed up with the actual evidence. How did the investigation even move forward with all that going on?
It was a mess, and not having everyone on the same page probably hurt the investigation. It created this atmosphere of, like, suspicion and different stories, and it made it really hard to look at the evidence fairly. But the investigation did continue, and in 1998, they called a grand jury to hear the evidence and decide if they should charge the Ramseys.
A grand jury? What that, exactly? And how did that fit into this whole crazy situation?
A grand jury is like a group of regular people, citizens, who look at the evidence the prosecutors give them. They decide if there's enough reason to think a crime happened, and if there is, they could issue what's called an indictment. That's basically a formal accusation that leads to a trial.
So this grand jury, it was their job to decide if there was enough evidence to officially accuse the Ramseys. That's a huge responsibility. What happened? Did they indict them?
The grand jury met in secret, so we don't know everything that went on.
Yeah.
But we do know the result. After months of looking at evidence and listening to people testify, they voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges connected to JonBenét's death.
Whoa, so the grand jury thought there was enough to actually charge the Ramseys. That's a big deal, especially with all the disagreements among the investigators. But didn't you say the district attorney was close to the Ramseys, so did it actually go to trial?
And this is where things get even weirder. The district attorney, Alex Hunter, he wouldn't sign the indictment. He said there wasn't enough evidence to win in a trial. To convict someone, remember, you got to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which is like the highest standard in court.
So the jury says charge them, but the DA says no. Talk about a standstill. What happened then? Did the whole investigation just stop there?
Well, not exactly. A new district attorney, Mary Lacey, she took over in 2002. And DNA testing was getting better, so she decided to look at some of the evidence again, like that touch DNA on JonBenét's clothing.
Yeah, the touch DNA. Remind me, what's that all about, and why was it so important in this case?
Touch DNA is like the tiny bits of DNA you leave when you touch something. They found some on JonBenét's underwear and her pants. At first, the technology wasn't good enough to get a full DNA profile from those samples. But by 2008, things had improved. They got a more complete profile from the touch DNA, and then they compared it to the Ramseys and other people connected to the case.
So they finally got a full profile from that mystery DNA. What did it tell them?
It was huge. The touch DNA, it didn't match anyone in the Ramsey family. It belonged to some unknown guy.
So after all those years of suspicion and accusations, the Ramseys were finally in the clear.
That's right. In 2008, District Attorney Lacey officially cleared the Ramseys. And she even apologized publicly for all the suspicion they'd been under. She said that DNA pointed to an intruder, some unknown man, being the most likely person who did it.
A public apology from the DA's office. Wow. You'd think that would be the end of it, the answer everyone was waiting for, but I guess it wasn't that simple, right?
Nope, not at all. It did clear the Ramseys, but then it opened up a whole new set of questions. Who was this guy? How did his DNA get on JonBenét's clothes? Was he the intruder Detective Smith was talking about all those years ago?
So even with the DNA clearing the Ramseys, the case was still far from over. Did investigators keep looking at other leads, or did they just focus on this unknown guy?
The investigation went on, though maybe a bit slower, and yeah, they really trying to figure out who this unknown guy was. They ran his DNA through all sorts of databases, but no matches.
So it was like a classic cold case, a piece of the puzzle that just wouldn't fit anywhere. Did they consider any other suspects during that time, or was it all about the unknown DNA?
There were a few other people they looked at, but those leads went nowhere. The most big one was this guy, John Mark Carr. He was a teacher, and in 2006, he confessed to the murder.
A confession after all this time, that must have been a huge development. What made him confess? Did he tell them anything new about the crime?
Carr's confession was, well, it was strange.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be fake. He had a history of saying crazy things. He even wrote a whole paper about, like, the sexualization of kids. His confession was full of holes, no real details, just inconsistencies. And even more important, his DNA didn't match the DNA they found at the crime scene.
Another dead end. It's like this case just wouldn't be solved. Every new lead, every piece of evidence just led to more questions. With the Ramseys cleared and that unknown DNA still a mystery, what happened next? Did it just become another unsolved case, forgotten in the files?
The case never officially went cold. The Boulder police, they've kept investigating. Every now and then, they look at the evidence again, follow up on any new tips. And lately, there's been talk about testing some of the evidence again, using the latest DNA technology.
Makes sense. DNA tech is getting better all the time. What exactly are they looking to test again, and what could they find out?
Remember that list of evidence? The garrote, the ransom note, stuff from Burke's room. None of that was ever tested for DNA. John Ramsey, he's been saying they should test all of it, thinks it could finally solve the case.
Could be. If they get new DNA profiles from those things, it could change everything. Maybe they finally get a match for that unknown guy, or find a new suspect entirely. What are the chances of finding a match after all this time?
The chances are definitely better now. DNA databases are getting bigger all the time, and with new techniques like familial DNA searching, they can search even wider, maybe find relatives of the unknown guy, even if his DNA isn't in the system.
So there's real hope that new DNA technology could be the key. Is there anything else happening that could help solve this case? Or is it all riding on those DNA tests?
Well, beside the DNA, you never know. Maybe a new witness will come forward or someone, on their deathbed might confess. It happens more than you'd think, especially with cold cases.
True. Sometimes all it takes is one person to speak up, one tiny detail that changes everything. It's almost like the case is waiting for that one final twist, the thing that makes everything clear. But until then, we're left with what we know, the evidence, the theories, and that big question, who killed JonBenét Ramsey?
And maybe an even bigger question.
Yeah.
Can we ever really know? With all the media attention, all the different stories, it's hard to know what's real. Even if we find the killer, will we ever understand why? What really happened that night?
That's a good point. It shows how much we don't know. Even with all the evidence, sometimes the truth stays hidden. But that's also what makes this case so interesting. It makes us think hard, weigh the evidence, consider different sides, and realize that sometimes there are no easy answers.
You got it. The JonBenét Ramsey case isn't just about solving a crime. It's about facing the unknown, the complicated parts of human nature, and the mystery of a young life that ended so tragically.
Yeah, it makes you think, for sure. It's a reminder that even with all the technology we have, some cases, they just don't have simple answers. So where are we now with all this? Anything new happening with the retesting of evidence?
Well, John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, he's been really pushing for more advanced DNA testing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's working with a private investigator and some forensic experts. They've asked the Boulder police to let them analyze the rest of the evidence at a special lab.
So even after all this time, he's still fighting to get justice for his daughter. That's really something. What kind of technology are they hoping to use? And what have the police said about all this?
They want to use these really advanced techniques, like touch DNA analysis, which can find like the tiniest bits of DNA, and familial DNA searching, which can compare DNA to find relatives of a suspect. Even if their DNA isn't in a database, it could, find a lot more potential suspects. But as for the police, well, they're not so keen on outside pressure. They say they're going to solve the case using their own methods and people. They're worried about, messing up the evidence or contaminating it if it goes to a private lab.
Yeah, I can see why they'd want to keep control of the evidence. But it makes you wonder if they're really looking at every possibility. It seems like a bit of a battle between the family wanting answers and the police doing things their way. What do you think will happen? Will they let them do the advanced testing?
It's tough to say. The police, they know DNA tech is getting better, and they say they're looking at everything, even working with outside experts. But they also say they're taking it slow to avoid messing up the investigation.
It's like walking a tightrope, isn't it? They want to be respectful of the family, but they got to stick to their rules and the law. It's a good reminder that even in a case this big, there are rules. It's not just about wanting the truth. It's about getting it the right way so it holds up in court.
Yeah, absolutely. And, while they're investigating, the JonBenét case stays with us. It's sad, but it's also really interesting. It shows how, even with all our technology, some mysteries, they just hang on. It makes us question not just who did it, but what evidence really means, how the media shapes what we think, and how little we really understand about why people do things.
It's true. This whole case has been crazy. Twists and turns, dead ends, then a little bit of hope. We talked about the evidence, the theories, all the work to get justice for JonBenét. But in the end, it's about a little girl who was killed, a family dealing with a horrible loss, and a community that still wants answers.
It really shows how fragile life is, and how some mysteries just never go away. We may never fully solve the JonBenét Ramsey case, but it'll keep fascinating us, making us think about human nature and how hard it can be to find the truth.
And you never know, maybe someday, because of the people who keep looking for answers and because science keeps moving forward, we'll finally have that breakthrough. Until then, the search goes on.
Exactly. And as we try to understand these big mysteries, we got to remember that sometimes the most important questions, they're the ones we can't answer. The ones that make us keep searching, keep asking questions, and keep trying to understand more.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the JonBenét Ramsey case. We have links to all the stuff we talked about in the show notes, so you can keep learning about this mystery on your own. Until next time, keep those brains working.